Okay, Ben, please stop doing the Bill Cosby impression. We have a show to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be talking a lot of Bill Cosby today. Monroe Anderson, Jimmy Coogan. We're going to be talking Jim Coogan. But come on, D. Dennis does a great Bill Cosby imitation. Now he's going to get shy and he won't do it. Come on, D. Try just let people hear your Bill Cosby imitation.
How's it going, Monroe? All right. You see, I was in jail. Now I got to get out. I was having fun. Theo. All right. Your Ben Jarofsky show for Wednesday, June 30th is moments away. But before we do this, let's thank our sponsors. Sponsors like SEIU Healthcare, Illinois, Indiana, the Chicago Federation of Labor are sponsors, as well as the Chicago Reader. ChicagoReader.com for all things there is to know the city of Chicago. Where to go, what to do, what to eat, what to drink, what kind of pot to smoke. All that's in there, including columns from our very own Ben Jarofsky and our colleague Maya Dukmasova. ChicagoReader.com, and to become a Benhead, ChicagoReader.com/Jarofsky for more information on how you can help this program. It is Wednesday, June 30th, and live from my apartment and his attic, this is the Ben Jarofsky Show. Today on the program, legendary Chicago journalist Monroe Anderson and the return of the legal eagle, JC Jimmy Coogan. And now your host, not a legal eagle, Chicago Reader columnist Ben Jarofsky.
Hello, everybody. Ben Jarofsky here. We're calling this Someone in New York City Wednesday. And here's why. Total breakdown in New York City. Hear the alarms going off. That's the sound of alarms blaring as New Yorkers wake up this morning to discover that the powers that be in their fair city messed up a big time. First question I know you have. Ben, you're a podcaster in Chicago. Why do you care about New York City? Excellent question. And the answer is, I'm utterly obsessed with politics. That's why, duh. It's like following the NBA playoffs. My beloved Bulls were eliminated from the playoffs, but does that mean I stopped watching basketball? Come on, people. Back to New York City. They had a primary election about a week or two ago. I can't remember. 14 people ran. Isn't that funny how so many people say, being mayor, I wouldn't want that job in a million years. That's what people generally say when you ask them our opinion about what Lori Lightfoot's doing. They don't really want to come out and say anything, so they just go, being mayor, that's not a job I would want in a million years. All right, everybody asked you if you wanted the job. Asked your opinion about Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Everybody's always ducking and dodging. Having said all that, 14 people ran for mayor of New York. Just saying, ladies and gentlemen. How many people ran in Chicago last time? For a job that nobody wants, a lot of people want it. Anyway. So, as I said, the election was about a week or so ago, but they still haven't stopped counting the votes. Why, you say? Good question, Madam Mayor. It's because they have ranked choice voting, and it's messing everything up. Here comes that part of the story where I have to explain rank choice voting. You know, I just want to point out that there's a huge advantage that Twitter has over old school reporters like myself and Monroe, who's standing by. Twitter never feels compelled to explain anything. Twitter's attitude is that if you're reading my dumbass tweets, you clued into whatever I'm talking about. So if I was tweeting this up, I would say RCV mess up in New York City, panic in Detroit. Totally unrelated song. I don't know why it popped in my mind. Anyway, and everyone in Twitterland would know what RCV meant, except for me. I'd be like, RCV? Does that mean Royal Crown Cola? No, that would be RCC. This is RCV. And then I would Google RCV the way I had to Google SMH. First time I saw it, some random millennial sent me a text saying about the Bulls going, Bulls blew that one last night, SMH. And I'm like, SMH? What's that? Oh, man, it's a shame getting old, Monroe. Anyway, RCV is ranked choice voting, and that's where you don't just vote for your first choice. Oh, no, you rank your choices 1 through 5. And so if I were voting would be number 1, Maya Wiley, number 2, Eric Adams, number 3, Diane Morales, number 4, Catherine Garcia, and number 5, Scott Stringer. Let's pause to appreciate how impressive that is that I can recite 5 candidates from an election held in New York City. I don't believe there's anybody out there in the city of Chicago who could do that. So it's either really impressive or it's a cry for help. Now to the mess up. On election day, Eric Adams was up by 9 percentage points, so it looked like he would be the winner, but no. Yesterday, the New York City Board of Elections reported that with the second votes counted from some of the losing candidates, Catherine Garcia had surged into second place. It was neck and neck between Adams and Garcia. It was like a horse race. And all the reporters in New York City were like, oh my God, here they come, spinning around the track. Let's pause to identify these people. Just think about how different New York City is in Chicago. Eric Adams is a police officer. Catherine Garcia was in charge of streets and sanitation in New York. Just think about that. The person in charge of streets and sand is very close to being mayor of New York City. I can't imagine all the years of streets and sands commissioners that I've known about in the city of Chicago, any one of them being elected mayor of the city. We are just such a different city than New York. And a police officer. I'm going to bring Monroe Anderson on in a little while, ask him, there's no police officer. Oh, no, Big Mac McCarthy. He wanted to be mayor of the city of Chicago. What, he got like 3% of the votes? Eric Adams looks like he may be the next mayor of New York City, unless it's the Streets and Sanitation Commissioner. Wait, hold it. Breaking news. I'll read you the latest update from the New York Times, which is breathlessly keeping all of us up to date. Yesterday, the board ran the algorithm on elections, posted the results, and then, following hours of comment from mayoral candidates and questions from reporters, abruptly took them down from the website, acknowledging on Twitter, where else Twitter, it had accidentally plumped up the tally with 135,000 erroneous test voters. Say what? Erroneous test voters? Tell me more, New York Times. Back to the story. The board had created about 135,000 dummy ballots to test the ranked choice voting software being used in several of the elections on primary day, including the Democratic primary for mayor. Those dummy ballots had votes for candidates on them, end quote. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. 135,000 dummy ballots. That's a lot of dummy ballots. Why so many dummy ballots? I mean, couldn't you just run a test with like 100? And by the way, there's no truth to the rumor that in Chicago, a dummy ballot is one cast for Mayor Lori Lightfoot in the last election. Got a little chuckle out of Monroe on that one. Anyway, apologize for that last joke. It wasn't even funny. Back to the New York Times story. On Tuesday, the board ran a preliminary ranked choice tally that was supposed to show that the state of the race pending the counting of more than 100,000 absentee ballots, but someone neglected to remove the dummy ballots from the system, so the tally included both the dummy ballots and the more than 800,000 actual ballots cast by voters. You following that, ladies and gentlemen? This falls under the category of what the beep? Someone neglected to remove the dummy ballots, so they got counted too? Man, someone's in a heck of a lot of trouble. Let's pause to reflect upon the New York Times' creative choice of words, as in, someone neglected to remove the ballots. Good word, someone. Very anonymous. It's unclear. I seriously doubt there's actually an employee at the New York City Board of Elections named someone who's in charge of dummy ballots. No, someone is actually somebody, and my guess is right now they're looking for that special somebody they can blame this on. I'm hoping whoever it is got union backing, because otherwise he or she's in a heck of a lot of trouble. You know, when I watch this screw up in New York City, I have two thoughts. My first thought is, oh, New York, you're just giving more ammunition to MAGA and Trump and all those people who say you can't trust elections. I know Monroe was thinking the same thing. You're just giving them more ammunition to somehow or other correlate what went down in New York City, where someone counted the dummy ballots with the real ballots. You're going to correlate that with some made-up fictitious fraud, in quotes, that allegedly occurred in where? Michigan, Florida, Georgia, Arizona, anywhere Donald Trump lost. Really irritates me, New Yorkers. And then on the other hand, I got to go, well, at least there's a city worse than Chicago. We got a great show today, everybody. Monroe Anderson is sitting by. He's all ready to talk about New York City. Bill Cosby, Monroe broke that story to me when I got out of the dentist's office today. Donald Trump, we can't forget Donnie Trump. And we may even talk about the congressional election in Ohio. That's an interesting one. the congressional election in Ohio, where basically Jim Clyburn is waging a fight against the Bernie Epton forces. Bernie Epton, Jesus, am I old, Monroe? The Bernie Sanders forces, Nina Turner running against Shontel Brown. So we'll be talking about that. And then Jim Coogan will come on later, and we'll do a lot of Trump talk, a lot of legal talk about is Donnie Trump about to go to jail. So plenty of political talk ahead. Let's start with Monroe. Monroe, welcome back, young man. Got to put your... There we go. There we go.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good afternoon. Listen, you were the one, as I said, I had come out of the dentist office and you broke the news. Bill Cosby, America's dad, will be out of prison. I think he's still in prison as I speak, Monroe.
We're talking about minutes to hours before he'll be free.
Wow. So what do I want to talk about first? New York City, the total meltdown in New York, or Bill Cosby? Let's go with New York City first, since I just got finished talking about it. Monroe, what a joke. I mean, and like I said, I follow New York politics. I know you don't follow it as close as I do, but you follow it a little bit. I follow New York politics. I always think it's like a precursor of Chicago, like Bill de Blasio ran as a lefty or a progressive. That's what they called him in the day back in 2013. So I had the sense that some Chicagoan would come along with a de Blasio style campaign. And Tony Preckwinkle.
Of course, we had the black mayor before New York.
That is true. The great Harold Washington, the greatest mayor the city of Chicago ever had, was elected in 1983. And the first black mayor of the city of New York was not elected until, I want to say, 1989. I'm doing this without notes, Monroe, and I'm not looking at the...
88 or 89.
I'm going to go with 89. And his name was David Dinkins. And then New Yorkers, dumbasses that they are, got so scared of having a black guy mayor that they turned around and elected Rudy Giuliani. Heck of a job, New Yorkers.
America's mayor. America's mayor and America's dad. Good combination.
Good. Maybe they'll share a prison cell together sometime. Giuliani.
Now,
Well,
Bill Cosby may be free. Maybe.
Yes.
He's free in New York, but there are other jurisdictions that may give him a call. Give him a ring.
All right. Well, since you mentioned, let's go to Bill. Let's start with Bill Cosby instead.
No. We could do.
All right. Let's go back to New York. I'm all over the map because I died to talk about both of them. But New York City, what a freaking mess up, Monroe. They counted the dummy ballots. And it's so funny. The New York Times story just cracked me up. It goes, someone at the Board of Elections counted the dummy ballots. Someone. Who is someone? They're looking for somebody.
Somebody's not much better. Because if you recall, Senator Warnock said that what was going on in Georgia was that they had some issue with somebody not wanting some other bodies not to vote.
Yes.
So somebody's ruling the day.
Somebody went from Georgia to New York. Screwed things up in New York.
Somebody's going to be riding through New York on a horse yelling, "The ninjas are coming. The ninjas are coming."
So, by the way, did you follow it along? I think I may have asked you this last week and you ducked and dodged. Did you follow it closely enough to have an affiliation with any of the candidates, or were you just...
Yeah, I told you I like Maya because she was a regular on MSNBC.
And who would your second choice have been?
Probably Yang.
Wow.
This would be different. Yeah.
So, I mean, the lefties who come on the show give me a lot of grief for my affinity for Eric Adams. I don't know. There's just something about Eric Adams. Like, let's give him a shot. And
he may be okay, except he's a cop, and he has a police mentality.
Well, here I am going to defend police officers. There were a lot of police officers who surrounded Harold Washington when he ran in 1983 that were his protectors, and they were Chicago police officers, Monroe Anderson.
Yes.
So,
And I knew a lot of them because I spent a lot of time with them as I did with the mayor. And they were very protective of Harold. They were very protective of Sawyer, but they were cops. They had a police mentality.
What do you mean by a police mentality?
Okay. This is an example. One of Sawyer's security people who had worked for Harold also. We were in Arkansas at Sawyer's mother's house, and one of the cops, we were sitting in the living room. Wasn't a lot of seats. One of the cops got up to go to the bathroom. I sat down. He came back and demanded that I give him back his seat, or he threatened to kick my, you know what, you know. And this is with the mayor in the room too, you know. I mean, and it was not an idle threat, because he used to tease me because I didn't have any scars on my face. And that was indicative of my living too soft a life or something.
Wow. See, it's funny you should say that, because Muhammad Ali used to brag about how pretty he was.
Yeah.
And he was a boxer. It doesn't get tougher than that, but then he was so fast. So, you know what I mean?
The thing, like I was saying, he was a cop. He wasn't a brain surgeon or a nuclear scientist. He was a cop. And so he had a cop's mentality. But it's sort of like having a Doberman or a Rottweiler. If they're your Rottweiler, then they're okay. But if they're somebody else's,
Yeah. By the way, you can't use brain surgeon anymore, because Donald Trump's the head of the Secretary of Housing for Donald Trump. It was literally a brain surgeon. You know what I'm talking about?
I think I told you, I had him on my TV show back in the day.
Who'd you have on the TV show?
Uncle Ben.
He was on your TV show?
Yes, on Common Ground. I had him on as a young, brilliant surgeon, brain surgeon.
Yeah.
I wish I could find the tape. It may have been destroyed, but I'm still looking for it.
You were sort of in awe of him a little bit back then.
No, I wasn't in awe of him, because he was pretty boring. He was as boring then as he is now. But
he didn't have politics, and that was the thing. He didn't have politics.
No, and the thing is, I was in awe of the fact that he was doing what he was doing at the time, which was unheard of.
All right, we went far afield there with that tangent, but anyway, so yeah, I don't know. My attitude is, let's see where Eric Adams could go. But I would have voted for Wiley #1, and for the dumbest of all reasons, because AOC endorsed her. We'll get into this. This is like what's going on in Ohio, and it's kind of a ideological identity politics that we all fall prey to at one level or another, Monroe, and you have pointed this out many times. We'll get back to this. James Clyburn is probably as responsible as any man in America for the nomination of Joe Biden as a Democratic presidential candidate, and of course his ultimate victory, because he gave him the blessed endorsement. You've talked about this so many times when you were on the show back in 2019 and 2020, and that's what enabled Biden to pick up some much needed votes, black votes, over Bernie Sanders. So identity politics through endorsements is a very real thing. And I probably would have voted with Wiley because AOC endorsed her, and not knowing anything else. I mean, that's better than your explanation, which you liked seeing her on MSNBC, which actually worse.
No. It was hearing what she had to say. She was an analyst. It wasn't just looking at her.
Okay, it was deeper than that. I apologize. So what a monumental screw up, Monroe.
Yes.
I mean, to count the dummy ballots. I read the New York Times editorial, and apparently the New York Board of Elections is just a horror show. It's a patronage pit. They've been screwing things up in New York for years. But that is just mind-boggling. I mean, I think Chicago is bad with, down through the years, votes suddenly being discovered in the basement of City Hall to settle aldermanic elections, that kind of thing. But what was it? Like 100,000 dummy ballots?
Well, see, New York, being the Empire State, is trying to out-dummy the Republicans, and they took a good shot at it this time. So the ninja ballot counters who are wrapping it up in Arizona right now are New York bound.
So what's your take on where MAGA is going to go with this? The breakdown in New York, the snafu in New York. Where's MAGA going with it?
It's proof that ballots are stolen, that the Democrats are stealing ballots. And they tried to do it this time, but they got caught. That's where the MAGA is going with this.
Do you think it'll have any credibility?
No, they have no credibility. And wait, let me rephrase that. They will have no credibility with common sense Americans, but with the crazy MAGA crowd. Oh yes, this is icing on the cake.
Yeah, and just imagine if Trump had his Twitter feed. He'd be tweeting this out.
That was the most patriotic thing that Twitter could have ever done, because they've taken his megaphone away from him.
Yeah.
So he's still lying, but he can't lie day in and day out, sometimes 100 times a day.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
And it's funny because my good government friends and a lot of my lefties who are big fans of ranked choice voting, I'm not a huge fan of it, are now wailing, that this is going to undercut the appeal of ranked choice voting. And I mean,
see, I like it on paper. In theory, it sounds like a good idea to me, although it's too cumbersome and complicated, probably.
Well, I was driving it's a funny thing. When I was listening to NPR, which is astounding for me, and I was with some election expert was explaining ranked choice voting. He goes, well, it's kind of complicated. And then when he was done explaining it, he goes, well, really, it's not complicated at all. But he was speaking to a NPR crowd, which is, of course, very intelligent crowd, smarter than just average people. But I'm not so certain that the actual ranked choice voting process is relatively straightforward and easy. But in this day and age, Monroe, when our election system is under siege, when it's already when Republicans are trying to destroy it effectively by taking away any kind of objective overseers of it and making the key judges in so many of these states lackeys of Donald Trump. And when the machinery and the technology is so controversial and possibly open to being hacked and misused and stuff, I don't know, just suddenly adding one more complication to the process just seems like too much of a reach. It's like everybody's just too smart for their own good. What's your thoughts on this?
Like I said, in theory, I like it. Since it blew up this time, I'm not sure. But in theory, what it does is it broadens the support of whoever wins the election. Because if the winner is the winner because people voted for them, and then them as number two if they didn't vote for them, that broadens at least two groups of people wanted them.
Yeah.
And so that cuts down on the divisions to some extent, and that would be a good thing. And if it forces politicians to be less divisive and ugly in their pitch, because they not only need, for example, if we had that in our next presidential election, then even if Trump ran, if he remained to be Trump, which he will, then he will only have the MAGA people, and whoever else is running against him would have, well, sorry, let me, because this is a party thing, I guess. Or no, it's
no, you could do it in a general election. You could do it either one. You could do it any. In other words, if you have ranked choice voting in a presidential election, then all third party candidates, and you would the point in a presidential election is you want. You don't have to. You can win without getting 50% of the vote. We've discovered that. Right. We've discovered that the hard way in over the last 20 years, twice.
Right.
And the benefit.
Yeah. No. In 2000, people who voted, if we had that system in place, those who voted for unsafe at any. At any speed, unsafe at any speed, their votes would have been counted with Gore's, and Gore would have been president.
Presuming they voted for Gore in second. That the assumption is that anybody who voted for okay, here's the choice. I'm taking you back in time, ladies and gentlemen. The year was 2000. The Democrat was Al Gore. The Republican was George Bush. Ralph Nader was one, and Patrick Buchanan. Let's not forget him, running from the right, and Ralph Nader running from the left. The assumption that centrist Dems always makes, and that people who voted for Gore, Nader would have otherwise voted for Gore in that election had they been given a choice. And I have never been certain that that would be the case. Knowing lefties, the way I know lefties, they may not have voted for anybody, even if you gave them ranked choice. Like, here's a challenge for you, Monroe. In 2019, the mayoral's race, you had a vote. Ranked choice voting, you had come up with five. Okay, now knowing you probably would have had Tony Bruckwinkle and Lori Lightfoot. Tell me three others that you would have voted for. Would you have voted for Gary Big Mac McCarthy? No.
Right, no.
Would you have voted for Paul? I'm Mayor Daley's old flunky, Vallis? No. Would you vote for Billy Daley, Mayor Daley's brother?
No.
No. Okay, well, say what I'm saying.
So we still have the same outcome.
Yeah. Right. So it's like I said, everybody's so smart. Sometimes people just, as Dennis would say, just too smart. I'm smart. You're not. Right?
You know, they've used that type of voting in some European countries to some success.
Yeah.
But
we ain't Europe.
Yeah, right.
I got breaking news.
Well, we're not at the rate we're going. We're not going to be America either. So.
Yeah. You're right. The MAGA will be pounding this. Fox will be really just making a big deal out of it, and again trying to convince somebody, convince people that somehow or other what went down in New York what's been going down for the last week is correlated to the insanity that they're inventing in Arizona. And I think it'll work with some folks. All right, let's switch to that Ohio election, that congressional election. We'll get into Bill Cosby in a little bit. I found this fascinating. I sent you the article. So, okay, everybody, Marcia Fudge was the congresswoman from a Cleveland-based congressional district in Ohio. She stepped down to take a position in the Biden administration. And Nina Turner, who is a hero to a lot of the people who are listening right now, Monroe, one of Bernie Sanders' key allies and strategists, is running very much as a Bernie Sanders type candidate, running from the left, obviously. A man named Chantel Brown is more of the centrist in the race. And he has been endorsed very enthusiastically by James Clyburn, the congressman from South Carolina, schlepping all the way from South Carolina, the way AOC is schlepping all the way from New York to make an endorsement. Identity politics, very much alive in the Democratic Party. What's your general thoughts about this showdown? Chantel Brown, endorsed by Clyburn, versus Nina Turner, endorsed by AOC.
What we have is a generational battle going on. Clyburn was AOC 40 years ago, 50 during the civil rights movement, 50 years ago. He was a civil rights activist. I think he was, if memory serves me right, he was with SNCC also. So he was or he was a Nina Turner, however you want to look at it. He was a radical back then. What has happened over the years is he has gone on the inside. He was on the outside throwing bricks in. Now he's on the inside, and you don't want, when you're on the inside, you don't want any bricks coming at you. So that's the difference, and the times have changed. And Nina is basically a female H. Rap Brown. Here she talks a lot of smack, and she doesn't say it nicely, but she gets to the point. And I suspect that she's ahead in the polls because a lot of young people like that. They want that. And so basically that's what we have going on.
Well, first of all, the fact that young people may like her generally does not help somebody in an election because, as studies have shown, older people vote at a greater rate than younger people.
Except there are exceptions. Look at Buffalo, where you got a bona fide socialist.
Yes, India Walton. Yes.
All right, exactly. So no, times are changing.
I would have voted for her in a heartbeat. All right, but it's interesting. The article, Clyburn, to your point, he was dismissive of what he called sloganeering from the left.
Right.
And he compared the rhetoric of today's activists, defund the police, to the rhetoric of the 60s, burn, baby, burn, which is straight out of H. Rap Brown. Right. And I'm like, wow. When I read that, Monroe, I'm like, I felt the same way you did. I'm like, James Clyburn, what are you saying? You would have been doing burn, baby, burn back in the 60s.
Right. Exactly. But now he's, we forget, it's like with women, for example, of that era. Mm-hmm. They look at the young women today and they just are like so shocked at the way they dress and the way they behave themselves, having a amnesia as to how they were acting when they were that age. They've cleaned it up in their minds and told themselves stories where they weren't doing these horrible, slutty things back then. That these girls, what they consider slutty, what these girls are doing now.
By the way, Ace Attorney Jim Coogan is joining us. We're going to bring him on in a little bit. I just want to finish up this conversation about Cleveland. This is one of my favorite themes, Monroe, the rewriting of history that people do as they get older. And I'm in that older category, and I'm watching it I just smile at it at so many levels. It was rampant. I'm going to get in trouble for saying this again, but it was rampant in the height of the Adam Toledo shooting. Where just people in their 60s and 70s were clucking their tongues and saying, how could they not rein in the kid? And I'm like, I grew up with people who were in their 60s and 70s, spent all their Saturdays and Fridays running around, getting into no good trouble.
Exactly.
Getting drunk, driving. Yeah. Sneaking out of the house, climbing through the back. Don't act like you were little angels then. And then they always say, Ben, we weren't having guns. Well, that's because guns weren't prevalent back then.
Exactly. In fact, even with the gangbangers, they had those homemade guns. I forgot what they called them back there, but where you literally, sometimes they were shooting bullets with a rubber band.
Yeah.
I forget what those things are called. It's slipping my mind now. But anyway, there were a few of those around, but mainly they were using chains and switchblades to try and kill each other.
And by the way, I wasn't doing any of that. I was sitting at home at night watching TV and Mary Tyler Moore show. But I'm just saying.
I was chasing girls.
That's what you were doing. Yeah, we all know that. All right. So before we bring Jim Coogan in, Monroe, no ducking, no dodging. If you lived in that district, would you vote for Chantel Brown, Jim Clyburn's candidate, or would you vote for Nina Turner, AOC's candidate?
Nina is a little too fiery for me at this point. We don't need that, I don't think. So I vote. I don't know anything about Chantel Brown, but because Nina was a Bernie broad, she lost me somewhere around with the sloganeering and what have you. Instead of having solid discussions on the issues.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to tell you something. I knew Monroe Anderson, who was a hippie radical back in the day. I cannot believe this is the same man. I can't believe this is the same man. I would vote for Nina Turner in a heartbeat. Come on, Monroe. And I would talk you into doing it, too. You would end up voting for Nina Turner. I know your wife would vote for Nina Turner.
Well, you know, I may have played a role in Dorothy Tillman becoming an alderman.
How so?
Harold asked me what I thought about her. He thought she was too much Nina Turner type, and so he asked me what I thought as a reporter covering City Hall, and I told him that I liked Dorothy, and she would bring a little sauce to the city council.
Well, she did that.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so that's why that's another lesson.
He didn't like her. That's a whole other story. We could do that. But I remember Harold
he
called her a thoroughly unlikable human being, something like that. And all right, let's bring Jim Coogan in, Ace Attorney Jim Coogan, and from Dwyer and Coogan. He's our legal mind on the Ben Joravsky Show. Welcome back, Jim.
Good afternoon, Ben, Monroe, D. Nice.
Hey, Jim.
How you guys doing?
D Nice, yes. All right, Jim, we got a whole bunch of legal topics we want to run by you, but let's start with the Bill Cosby case. Monroe and I have not gotten around to talk about it. We spend so much time talking about politics. Bill Cosby, it looks as though the story is just breaking, will be let out of prison. Are there any updates, Jim, that we should know about since we've been on the air in the last half hour or so?
I don't think there's anything new other than the decision itself coming out. You know, like maybe there's something about when he'll be released, but I haven't seen anything beyond the news about the decision itself. But yeah, it's, I mean, I think for legal observers, it probably isn't surprising on every level. I know that there was an intermediate appellate decision that affirmed his conviction in the past, but this was the Supreme Court for Pennsylvania. I think that's what they might call it something else there. But basically, yeah, the primary reasons that this was overturned had to do with, if people recall from the trial and the issues that were raised a couple of years ago when this happened, there was kind of a complicated history. It was something where there was a 12-year statute of limitations for the sexual assault. And it was right up against that 12 years. But years ago, there had been some kind of a conversation and apparently not a written recording about this agreement, but some agreement between the prosecutor and Bill Cosby and his attorneys that they would not prosecute him if he agreed to testify in a civil case regarding these issues. So again, I still don't quite I haven't had a chance to read it, and criminal law in Pennsylvania is not the primary focus of my practice. It is still an interesting question, and these kind of things, you know, there's a separate one we can talk about in a second, the other issue. But it's strange to me. I didn't understand at the time how it was understood to be reliable when an agreement like that wasn't in writing in some fashion. But then again, prosecutors make agreements all the time with defense attorneys all across the country, and a lot of it is just happening quickly, and they don't, I imagine that's probably what happens. They don't reduce these things to writing.
And what happened was you got a different prosecutor.
Correct. Right. Yeah. So you have a new person who has a different opinion about it.
Exactly.
You get to prosecutorial discretion, and I think that there's probably a discussion about that in there, because ultimately, beyond the agreement on the Cosby side of it, in other words, him relying upon it, you also have hey, this is a new elected official who may see the case differently. Why would they have the freedom to prosecute the case as they see fit? But I mean, I guess, you know, at the end of the day, you're always any of these decisions, they're balancing the rights of the accused They're balancing the rights of all people who could be accused of crimes at some point in time, and they're looking at what the impact on the victims is not primary because they're not technically a party to the case. It's the people of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But the other issue is probably more prevalent. Actually, it is definitely more prevalent because this came up in the Harvey Weinstein prosecution, and that is modus operandi evidence. So if the other thing that happened in the original prosecution for Cosby is the first trial ended in a hung jury. And in the second trial, the judge allowed multiple witnesses to testify about experience that they had with him using drinks and possibly drugs, and witnesses that felt like they were either recalled or thought that something had happened while they were in a stupor or out of it. And one would imagine that would have a pretty powerful impact on the jury. So
because there's women that didn't know each other and they accuse him of the same MO, basically.
Yeah, which sounds like, that's extraordinarily powerful corroboration. But, you get back to the question of, well, these weren't the crimes that he's charged with in that case. And so there are supposed to be, this is something you learn in law school about criminal prosecution, when they use evidence like that, that's the kind of thing that tends to bleed over the line into character evidence, which is not generally admissible because you could just kind of put on all kinds of things about the person's bad character. And you'll hear it in murder trials where somebody will say, hey, I'm not saying this guy's a great guy, he cheated on his wife, but at the same time, that's not the same thing as murder. It's always an uphill battle for a defense attorney when they're dealing with a person who just isn't very likable or who is kind of a bad person outside of just that accusation. So I think that was the other primary basis for the conviction being overturned, that it went too far in this case. The judge allowed either too many witnesses or too much content for each witness's testimony about other situations.
Go ahead,
Let
Monroe.
me ask you a question real quickly. There were 58 women that accused Cosby of these sexual advances and rapes and what have you. There are other jurisdictions. Do you think that there may be another trial? He can't be tried in Pennsylvania, but couldn't he be tried in New York or Arizona or someplace like that?
I don't even know if he couldn't be tried in Pennsylvania, but for how long ago any of those instances occurred.
Yeah.
I mean, this ruling would only apply to this conviction. I'm not sure how contemporaneous, and I mean, he's about 80 now. I know he's getting up there.
83.
Okay, so, I'm not sure how long ago, that would be my first question, or first thing I would look at to answer your question is, where's the statute of limitations for any of these other potential victims?
Well, if he did 2 a year of the 58, he could be as recent as, say, 2018 or 2017.
I mean, sexual assault statutes are pretty long. They're the second longest thing generally after homicide. So, to further answer your question, there may be other chargeable crimes in other jurisdictions, even in other counties in Pennsylvania or wherever, that those prosecutors put in the bag because guy's already in jail and he had a 10-year sentence. So it doesn't mean that he's out of the woods if there are other crimes that could be charged within a statute. Absolutely.
So I got a confession to make here, Jim and Monroe. And I'd love to get Monroe's response to this more as the baby boomer here. Bill Cosby, aside from these legal issues, is one of 3 of my favorite people in the world that I had to drop. And when I say favorite people in the world, like artists that I really, do I say idolize? I don't know. There was this era, Jim and Monroe in the late 60s, early 70s, where I just thought Bill Cosby was the greatest, funniest guy, the coolest guy. And I know it's hard to think of him as the cool guy because he went in a different direction in the 80s, but I thought his comedy in the 60s was great. He was on a show called I Spy. He did a lot of movies that I thought were great. And then, of course, there's Woody Allen and Michael Jackson. Now I'm ashamed to say I liked any of them. Probably Bill Cosby at the top of that list. So Monroe.
Yes.
Most people are going to view, like they'll listen to the Jim Coogan's explanation as to why Bill Cosby is going to be let out of prison. and they go, he got off on a technicality.
Yeah.
And that what really matters is that he committed these crimes, and it's just there's something wrong with our system when you are you could avoid punishment and accountability for the wrongdoings that you did because you manipulated. I'm just telling you how people are going to see it. Our system to get out. Do you view it that way, Monroe?
Yeah, he got off on a tech, but as far as being a fan, I was never a major fan of Cosby's, although I did like the Cosby Show when he was Dr. Huxtable. But as a student journalist at Indiana University, he played there, and I tried to get an interview with him, and he just waved me off. And I took it personally.
Well, that's why you didn't like him.
No, I had interviewed as a student journalist. I interviewed The Fifth Dimension, and a couple of other major stars like that.
Yeah.
And I was anxious to get him, and he just waved me away. He shook his head. And so
I hear you. I would hold that against him too.
And plus, I was seriously a Richard Pryor fan. And he was lecturing Richard about using curse words.
Yeah.
And I mean, the curse words were part of Richard's craft.
By the way, total tangent. Total tangent. And I just have to say, you mentioned Richard Pryor.
Yeah.
I'm going to send this to Jim Coogan. All young people should watch this. They took the Ed Sullivan Show. Ed Sullivan Show had a variety hour TV show on mainstream television in the 50s and the 60s. So people like me and Monroe grew up watching Ed Sullivan. And they've gone through the Ed Sullivan Show and parsed out like 1,000 hours, I want to say, of different acts. And it's on YouTube. And I spent, I hate to say how much time I spent, Jim Coogan, on Sunday watching old clips of the Ed Sullivan Show. But there was a Richard Pryor appearance, Monroe, on the Ed Sullivan Show from like 1971. Blew my mind that Richard Pryor went on. There was no, this was TV, this was CBS. This was as mainstream as you're going to get. And
it was live.
It was live. He did a performance where he went into he was a junkie at one point and a wino at another point. He made fun of white people at another. He did his white man accent, and I'm like, God damn! I can't believe he got away with this.
Oh yeah,
in 1971. So anyway, a tangent within a tangent.
Well, that was when he was making his shift from because he was showing up in a suit and tie, trying to be like Cosby actually.
Yes.
Initially.
And not doing a good job of it.
Right, exactly.
Because that's not who he was. All right, Jim Coogan, the question to you, do you see this as avoiding punishment and accountability on a technicality, or do you see this as showing how strong our system of justice is in America?
Well, look, I mean, my inclination as a lawyer is to say, I don't know if I really believe in. I don't like the phrase "he got off on a technicality" because I think it's usually. I mean, look, not everybody has the time to sit down and like look at all these issues. And I know that's not why Monroe's saying it. He's saying it because he believes that if the guy's substantively guilty, that it doesn't make any sense for him to be out of prison. I hate that phrase just because it's too glib. You know, it just kind of like glosses over. Hey, if you're ever convicted or accused of a crime, you would want the system to actually protect you from what the government's able to do and bring to bear. But then again, that gets into once you start having that conversation, now you're also talking about, well, that doesn't really apply to every defendant, does it? Because a guy like Bill Cosby's got a lot of money to spend on his defense. And do those systematic protections really apply to everybody else? So sitting here on my high horse talking about the majesty of the law and the good parts about the Fifth Amendment protections against self-incrimination, or modus operandi evidence, or whether or not this agreement should apply. It's easy to do in the abstract, you know. So I guess there's a lot of concepts that come in to answer your question. Do I get to do a little Cosby nostalgia too, since you guys
go ahead?
I mean, I grew up. I mean, you know, I'm a different generation. I grew up watching the Cosby Show. So it was kind of blew my mind when this stuff started to come out whatever it was, 6-7 years ago. I mean, and I am old enough to remember we would, as a family, we would rent tapes of Bill Cosby's like family-friendly stand-up act or whatever it was, and listen to him in the car driving around. I thought it was hilarious as a little. I was whatever 10 years old or something like that. It was great. It was better than listening to grown-up music that I didn't want to listen to. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's kind of. I think it's hard. It is a weird thing. I totally understand where you're coming from, Ben, when you're trying to reconcile someone who you thought you had every reason to respect. I mean, Cosby probably even more than, there was always some unusual stuff around Michael Jackson, but I mean, Cosby, I don't think anybody really had an understanding or a belief that this is what was going on, which of course is one of the things that the victims' lawyers and the plaintiffs' lawyers representing some of these victims were talking about, is that's what he used to his advantage. It wasn't even just wealth and power and celebrity. It was also the fact that he could garner trust because these women see him as this father figure because that's what he was on television for so long.
And
so
he can help their careers. And he can help their carears, yeah.
Right, entertainment connection. So there you go. But
that's that Harvey Weinstein.
Yeah, I mean, technicality, I don't know. I guess to me, I always want to go a little step further and figure out what it was. I think these are legitimate things that the court should have pause about when it comes to how cases are prosecuted in Pennsylvania. But, you know, I don't know how strong it really is because I didn't go through the whole decision.
All right, so I'm going to ask Monroe this question, and then we'll see how Jim Coogan handles it. In your humble opinion, what is more outrageous, Monroe Anderson? O.J. Simpson walking around free, Bill Cosby potentially walking around free, or Donald Trump having never gone to prison? Which is more outrageous, Monroe Anderson?
Okay, before I answer that, let me give you some breaking news. Donald Rumsfeld just died at 88.
That is breaking news, Donald Rumsfeld.
Right, okay. Now, back to your question.
Mm-hmm.
Trump. He's attempting to kill democracy. He's responsible for hundreds of thousands of Americans being dead because of the way he handled the pandemic. He lied about it and didn't do anything. So, and if he got back in office, thing one he'd do is make sure that Biden got indicted on something or another. And then he'd do all kind of ugly things to all kind of people of his enemies. I mean, Nixon had an enemies list that he didn't operate off on that hard. Trump has already gone after his enemies list, and he's doing it right now. And if he ever got back into power, Katie barred the door.
Yeah. I'm actually with you on that one, Monroe. And O.J. Simpson did prison time. They're still chasing him. I don't know if you guys follow this stuff, but they're the families are still chasing O.J. Simpson to get their civil verdict, the money out of him on that one, and he's got lawyers blocking it. So in many ways, he's a marked man. I think Bill Cosby will. I mean, obviously, his legacy is shattered, and
right.
But Donald Trump has never, as far as I know, faced any consequences. And this goes back to his days, you know, as
discrimination with his daddy back in the 70s.
Yeah,
when they was discriminating against black people, not renting them properties.
So it's outrageous.
And they worked that one out some kind of way.
So before I officially transition to Donald Trump discussion, Jim, do you have a position on that? What's more outrageous?
Well, I mean, you know, if we're talking about people in positions of power manipulating that to avoid prosecution, OJ's crimes were violent crimes. I think everybody pretty much agrees that he actually murdered his ex-wife and Ronald Goldman. Sexual crimes are sexual crimes. Those are pretty violent as well. And Cosby, if it's true, if Monroe's got that number, that's a lot of them. I mean, this is probably, there could be hundreds of women. Who knows? Yeah. Trump's are more broad reaching, or they weren't until he became president. You know, he manipulated the prosecutor in New York for years. Wasn't that one of the stories that came out? His son and daughter were going to be prosecuted, and somehow his lawyers went over and talked Cy Vance out of it 10 years ago. I mean, so his financial crimes in New York that we have lots of at least public evidence that have probably happened, have cheated people out of whatever. You know, if you're a taxpayer in New York, you've been cheated because you paid more because he paid less.
Yep.
But now, of course, as Monroe pointed out, that the bigger deal now is, since the ridiculous and incomprehensible rise that he's had since 2015 to being a national political figure in this country, means that the damage can certainly be more widespread if, for example, he's not held to account for any of the things that he has done, which hopefully, you know, the irony of having this discussion today is that at least his company may be indicted as soon as tomorrow, if that's really true. That's the rumor that was spread this morning. I mean, you know, I haven't seen all the evidence that exists, but just knowing everything, that the way their business operated and the way he behaves like he's some kind of criminal boss, frankly, I'd be so shocked if there wasn't actually some sort of either bank or wire or insurance fraud or tax fraud somewhere baked into that system.
Or legal laundering.
Yeah, well, right. I mean, obviously that would be part and parcel to the frauds, because you're hiding that money or you're hiding its source. And that always brings us back to the discussion of, why would anybody do business with him? So it would make total sense that the money would be coming from somewhere else, because he's always countersued people. And even Monroe mentioned it, and you guys are just touching on that issue from the department, I guess it would have been Housing and Urban Development or whoever it was that sued for discrimination in the 70s. That we've had that discussion before. I mean, he countersued them. I mean, it's the most insane thing ever. And you know whose idea that was? Roy Cohn, the guy who he wished all his other lawyers would act more like mob lawyer Roy Cohn, who didn't take notes conveniently. You know, like all these things, it comes back to answer your question about outrageousness. I guess you look at this particular individual, and so many things that he does are just they're dripping with criminality constantly. You just can't really believe that there isn't some actual crime that's happened.
Part of the homework assignments that I gave both of you this week consisted of sending you an article from the New York Times that gets at the tactics of Donald Trump for years and years before he was president, where he used the law, I think they used as a club, to bludgeon his opponents, his enemies. He would file lawsuit after lawsuit, and he's still playing that game. And Jim Coogan and Monroe, I think it's catching up to him. I believe that he may have overplayed his hand. It's a current lawsuit he filed. Jim, why don't you tell folks a little bit about it and get Monroe's comments on it after that. A lawsuit that Donald Trump filed against, I think it's the city of New York, regarding his oversight of a municipal golf course in New York City.
Right. So he's got a golf course in the Bronx, I believe, right? And so the city had a contract with him to, let's see, I think it's a $30 million. Basically, he had gotten a contract with the city to allow use of the course, and he spent money on the course in order to comply with this contract. Based upon his ill repute, based upon their desire not to do business with somebody who incited a riot against the Capitol, Bill de Blasio canceled the contract. So instead of just letting this go, Trump, in his usual style, is countersuing or is suing them over the loss of this and calling it an illegal breach of contract. And of course, his ranting and raving is about that this is politically motivated. But you know, I think there's probably arguments to be made that it doesn't necessarily mean like it's automatically in the best interests of the city to have this contract in the first place. So this is his, but of course now, if he does follow through with this, there will be a discovery process. They'll go into finances for how they paid for these improvements. What did he really spend? Like, who knows? You know, he's the kind of guy who will spend nothing and then present you a bill for $6,000, or, you know, like, or not pay the contractors that actually did the work. I mean, he's had dozens and dozens and dozens of groups over the years have sued him for not performing contracts as the recipient of services that he never paid for.
Yeah. And so the irony is by him going on the attack and filing the suit against New York City, then New York City can turn right around and sick its lawyers into Donald Trump and sick its accountants into Donald Trump and ask him some questions under oath about, as Jim Coogan was pointing out, his business dealings. And it could end up exposing him to, I don't know what, Monroe, potential liability, criminal prosecution, whatever, lying under oath. I think it's a really dumb move on Trump's part. Your thoughts, Monroe?
Yeah, Trump is no genius. I know you never thought about this, but trust me, he is not a genius. He has a reptilian brain, and so he strikes, but he is not. He plays tic-tac-toe in a three-dimensional chess game. So he's going down. That's my prediction that they're going to get him this time. Because the difference was before he's a sleazeball construction person in New York, and everybody knew or learned that he couldn't be trusted. The reason he has this 85-year-old lawyer now is because he can't, who was once a good lawyer, but his time has come and gone, basically. And that's because he can't get the A-team he'd like to have because nobody wants to work for him because he screws the lawyers. He doesn't pay them. And, when you charge $1,000 an hour or something like that and putting in hundreds of hours, then you don't want to get short-cheated, as Trump will do.
Yeah, so we'll see if he gets indicted tomorrow. We'll be watching that one. Probably convene
it won't be tomorrow. It's Weisenberg gets it tomorrow.
He gets it tomorrow.
Yeah, Trump is later. I think Jim would agree with me that they're just building a case.
Well, yeah. There's been all kinds of stuff, rumor and innuendo into the press about whether Weisselberg's cooperating or not. My thought is I think it's good that I've heard legal commentators say things like, well, if he's still going into work, he may not be cooperating with these prosecutors. But I don't really know if that's true because he could be going into work and downloading files.
He could be wearing a wire.
But seriously, though, as long as he's not being locked out, then he's going to have access to whatever. And look, both you guys know this because you've got enough world experience and wisdom to understand there's going to be very limited evidence of anything that Trump actually did because he doesn't write things down. He doesn't use email. He doesn't use text messages. He works like an insulated mob boss. That's how he ran the Trump organization for 35 years. So whatever's there, it might be harder to find. It might be something that you'd have to go grab a couple things or make some photocopies or get a flash drive and grab some other corroborating things because he's going to deny all of it. He's going to pin it on his son. He's going to pin it on his other son. He's going to pin it on Alan Garten, Weisselberg, whoever else he can blame and say, hey, I just signed whatever they put in front of me. This wasn't my idea. That guy must be off. Whatever you saw him getting those benefits, that's probably because he was screwing me the entire time. I didn't even authorize him to live at that, penthouse apartment. That was his idea. I didn't do any of this. I won't respond. That's going to happen.
Oh, what a liar.
Except they have Jennifer Weisenberg, his former daughter-in-law.
She wants to cooperate, right?
Yeah, she's corroborating. You got Cohen corroborating. I mean, there are people talking. But
by the way, just so people know who are not utterly obsessed with this, like Jim and Monroe and myself, the Alan Weisselberg in question, I think he's the chief accountant, isn't that what he is? Accountant by profession for Trump's organization. And I never heard of the dude before because I'm not like a Trump expert until Michael Cohen. Yeah, I think Jim, you were on the show right after Michael Cohen gave his testimony into Congress, and Cohen was just like pounding it. He was like, "Talk to Alan Weisselberg. He'll tell you. He knows. Weisselberg knows." He was like, because Cohen was about to go to the penitentiary, and he made a decision. He was going to take Trump down. He made that decision, and he was the one.
Yeah, he was upset. He's upset with Trump because Trump didn't offer to help him. And before that, Trump would not have these problems if he had only given Cohn a job in the White House somewhere. He could have been dormant. He would have had in the White House. But Cohn was his faithful puppy dog for 10 years, and then he just kicked him to the curb.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the first time I ever heard the name Alan Weisselberg, and it came out of Michael Cohen's mouth. And now Cohen is probably really happy right now that Weisselberg may be the one to spill the beans on Donald Trump. All right, Jim, originally I brought you on the show. I wanted you to get your thoughts about the Supreme Court and its rulings, and all these other things happen. And I said, the hell with that. We'll put the Supreme Court at the bottom and just have a limited discussion on it, though. It's pretty important stuff. I don't mean to minimize the Supreme Court's ruling. There's one coming out tomorrow, I want to say, having to do with campaign finance reform. I think it's gerrymandering tomorrow that the Supreme Court is supposed to rule on. The initial coverage of the Supreme Court, and this is with the Supreme Court with the 3 judicial appointees from Donald Trump, was that it was surprisingly moderate, I guess, is the word I would use, Jim and Monroe, that it was not as far right as Donald Trump or MAGA had wanted. Jim Coogan, is that your assessment so far, that it's moderate, or do you think that they're overplaying that?
Well, I think that a lot of times the public perception or the discussion about how hardcore to the right or to the left the Supreme Court is, it can get confused because there are cases that can confound those usual ideological lines. So there's some cases that kind of cross over and maybe just, so you look at it and you think, well, that really wasn't the most extreme thing in the world. Or maybe a decision is joined, it's a 7-2 decision, but there's 3 concurrences. And so the actual holding isn't really extreme. But a couple of the concurrences, if somebody bothered to read them, and only legal scholars and legal wannabe scholars really read this stuff because it's dense and they're 50 pages long and there's lots of technical stuff in there, you might realize that the voices of these justices actually are pretty strident, or would be willing to bring back doctrines that have been long dormant and actually are kind of extreme. But, when it comes to this particular term, I think you and I were talking a little bit about this. I sent this to your attention, and I'm sure you saw it anyway. One of the cases that could have, I think, a very wide-reaching impact is the California labor rights case. It's called Cedar Point Nursery versus Hasid. And this actually goes back to some of the most basic tenets of the labor rights movement with like organizing field workers who work in the fields that grow so much of this country's produce. The basic question was, if there was a California regulation that allowed organizers to go into these fields, now they were restricted. They could either go before work, during a lunch hour, or after the day was over. So one of those 3 times. And there was a limitation on how long they could stay there. They'd have to leave if they went on the lunch break and the lunch break was over, they'd have to get out of there. And where they could go. There was like designated places that they could go pursuant to the regulation. And the question was the lawsuit was filed against the state of California on the issue of whether this was an illegal taking of the property of the farm owner. Now, organization of labor obviously requires that they go somewhere to meet with people who are doing that work. Lots of times laborers, particularly migrant farm workers, don't know their rights, don't understand that they could organize and possibly get a better wage, better benefits, and they don't really know how to accomplish this stuff unless they're actually talking to somebody who would help them from whatever that union would be. So honestly, I think it's a pretty reasonable balancing of the rights of the workers and the owners to say, look, there's got to be a time frame that they could, because going and finding them at each of their houses, not efficient, not going to work. It's not as if the union has unlimited resources to go find people. So finding them at work is the most efficient way to do it. Now, the reason why I say this can be wide-reaching is a 6-3 majority of the conservative, quote unquote conservative justices ruled that this is a per se taking. That just the fact that they're going on the land means it is a taking for which, now here's the other thing that could be an escape clause here, a taking for which the government, one thing they can do in any of those situations is compensate the business for that taking. So either the state of California would have some sort of, statutory thing that they would pay to business owners to allow labor organizers to come on their property, or the more burdensome way to do it would be the labor organizers would have to pay for it. But the bigger issue here, and why this could have a pretty wide-ranging impact on all kinds of government regulation, is if you look at the language, and actually I did read the dissent here from Justice Breyer, who identified all kinds of, his concern was, this is not strikingly different from all sorts of other government regulation that requires investigators and parties, even if it's not actually a government official, to come onto property to do things, to inspect things, other labor regulations, health and safety regulations, police and fire inspections. That what happens with the rest of those things when other types of businesses sue the government and use this as precedent to say, hey, listen, get out of my property. I don't want you here. I mean, at some point you could see an entire regulatory scheme breaking down on the question of, well, do they have to get compensation for it? Do the regulations have to be written in a way that constrains the regulators more? And otherwise it's suddenly it becomes an infeasible thing to actually enforce any number of things that are supposed to govern business operations. And of course, we've talked about this concept before. I always think it's a lot easier to be a conservative when it comes to the philosophical way that you're going to run a government, because it's easier to just tear things down. Or in this case, if this decision creates all sorts of havoc and it screws up government's ability to do its job, whatever, it doesn't matter. Yeah. I mean, if you're a hardcore conservative, you don't believe government should have a job doing anything, let alone regulating businesses in the first place. So the risk is nothing. What do you care? It doesn't matter. I mean, until people start getting poisoned or burned alive in things because the regulatory systems don't work anymore. So to partially answer your question about how right-wing this court is willing to go, this is a decision that will unify the hardcore right-wingers and the pro-business corporate lawyers who that was their job before they became a judge, because it's something that they would believe in philosophically. And my concern is I don't really know how this is going to play out in the future. I mean, there are some other consequential decisions that you were alluding to, but this could be very consequential.
I'm with you on it, and I'm glad you brought it to our attention. My sense is, and I have this underlying cynicism about these justices. They're going to go against unions whenever they can. They're going to be very pro-capitalist. I don't know what else to call it. Whenever they can, they will be very much restrictive when it comes to abortion. Now, will they overturn Roe? I don't know. That may, John Roberts, very political justice. That may cause more problems for the Republican Party than they want. And if you can accomplish the same thing with a handful of rulings, so that effectively abortion's outlawed in all red states in America, then why bother? So that's what you got on one hand. And then the other hand, they said, college athletes can get paid. And everybody's like, whoa, man, they're so liberal. I'm like, I don't know. I think it's overplayed with this. I think, oh my God, that one, they're milking that one decision, Monroe Anderson, to make themselves look like the second coming of Thurgood Marshall. And I think it's overplayed. Your thoughts, Monroe Anderson?
Abraham Lincoln killed slavery in 1863. And so now the Supreme Court has made it, is dancing on his grave, shall we say, the idea of having slavery. Because those kids were working for nothing, basically. They were the ones bringing these millions and millions of dollars. You got coaches making $5 million a year, and the star of the team can't even sell his jersey to somebody without being penalized for it.
Yeah, so it's an about time ruling. It's
exactly
about freaking time.
Right.
So stop patting yourself on the back for a ruling that should have been made 30 years ago. I hear you, Monroe. We'll be watching these rulings. I think tomorrow, like I said, there'd be 2 more. We're going to close with this, a little Bill Barr levity. One of the homework assignments I sent the 2 of you was just an excerpt from an article in Atlantic. Monroe, I don't know if you got a chance to read that article. It was obviously a reporter who was very favorable to Barr, had access to Barr. You know how the game is played, Monroe. You were on both sides of it. I played
and got played.
Yes, you played and got played. I've just been played. I haven't done I haven't been the player yet, but my day will come, huh? But anyway, so Barr, it's pretty funny reading, and kind of frightening actually at the same time, how utterly insane Donald Trump is, and how manipulative Bill Barr is. And how fraudulent Bill Barr is, and how he plays the game, and he toadied up to Donald Trump for a couple of years, got all that power that he was using to bring back America to 1950. I don't know what his ultimate goal was. Then ultimately he decided he couldn't go with Trump on the election fraud. I don't know why. That was just too far for even Bill Barr. So he gives an interview with the AP reporter. Folks, you got to read this to believe it. And he gives one sentence, Jim Coogan. He just says one sentence that I don't believe the evidence supports the claims of fraud, something like that. The AP reporter rushes from lunch, runs over to his computer, writes the story. AP sends it out. That evening, Trump called Barr into the White House. I mean, this is like within 4 hours. And it's like a lunatic, dressing him down.
Roy Cohn never would have done anything like that. Never would have said anything like that. That was the problem.
So, yeah, from Trump's point of view. So I guess that means that Bill Barr is, what, a little less evil than Roy Cohn? Is that Jim, what's your takeaway from all this madness?
Well, I mean, obviously when Barr said that back in December, of course the guy ran straight to the presses to get that out, because I mean, people like you or me were thinking, all right, well, good. At least the Attorney General's not going along with this insanity. I mean, it was reassuring, but I think this is what comments on your point, how terrifying this really is, because if he'd gone a different direction with it, who knows what they could have actually done. Yeah. And I think what was in the article or the excerpt that you sent, something about, or this was November, I think, but Mr. President, you've got 6 weeks or something like that to deal with whatever you want to do. You should be strategic about it or something. I mean, clearly Trump was ready to go in the completely most insane direction, and screaming and yelling at Bill Barr was part of that because he wouldn't go along with him. I mean, it just goes to show this is another insight into how that White House operated, how they viewed government, and how he obviously, Trump, would never, I mean, to the people who thought he might at some point understand the guardrails or how things are supposed to operate or how you're not supposed to abuse power to exclusively advance your own interests. Of course he was never going to do that. It's just the most preposterous notion for anybody who has like even the most, the little like wit of common sense to think that he would care about any of these things, or just along those lines, the notion that Bill Barr is not his attorney. He's working for the country. I mean, it's something that if I were like, this has never happened, but if I were the president, I wouldn't even think about the guy somehow works for me. I'd be afraid. It's like how I think the Biden administration is trying to operate, and I know this is what the Obama administration deliberately did. They stayed far away from those lines. They didn't bump up against them. They tried to actually have these ethical lines, and I'd be afraid. I'd say, no, I don't, and maybe to my detriment, or maybe to the administration's detriment, to not having political influence over the way the DOJ worked. But they've got too much power to be used that way. And that was the problem. Like you said, he cozied up to Trump to do the things that he wanted to do. Of course, he could manipulate the guy. It doesn't seem like it's really that difficult. World leaders did it in front of our eyes. So, yeah, I mean, it's an example of Barr doing making another effort and using John Carl to do it, to try to bolster his legacy. Although I guess if it's just commenting on Barr here, it's sort of funny to think that he would imagine that somehow people would think that this makes him the reasonable guy in the room or the hero for democracy. I mean, if he had gone rogue and gone crazy to try to keep Trump in office, you got to hope that something else would have stood up and stopped that from happening. He's no hero. I think you may have already said that today, but yeah, it's amusing in some ways and terrifying in others.
Yeah. When I look at it, it was Barr realized that he was being asked to jump the shark. That was just too far. He couldn't do that because that might have been the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of Congress going after him big time.
Sure.
In his final days, and it wasn't worth it.
Well, one thing's for certain we've seen with Bill Barr, he undercut the Mueller report. That's so obvious. All the three of us have had so many conversations about that, one form or another, down through the years. It's one of Jim Coogan and mine's favorite conversation. But at this juncture, for whatever reason, to your point, Monroe, he decided, I cannot go here. I cannot make up evidence of a non-existent theft of the election to justify the quote-unquote re-election of Donald Trump. That's just too far for me. And maybe he did it just because he was worried about his legacy. Who knows? Who cares at some point? He didn't do it.
Right.
But yeah, so Jim, I'm not holding a parade for a Bill Barr. Oh Lord! But I urge folks, it's in the Atlantic, and you can read. It's definitely, it's one of those cozy up pieces where the reporter had access to Barr, so he makes Barr look like the second coming of who's the lawyer to Kill a Mockingbird? Jim Coogan.
Finnegas.
Yeah. Atticus, yeah, he makes him look like the second coming. I was going to say Gregory Peck, but then I realized, well, he was the actor who played the. So Barr's mind in the Bill Barr movie, Gregory Peck will play me, even though they don't look like that. All right, Monroe Anderson, Jim Coogan, thank you very much. This has been a delightful conversation. I had a lot of fun doing it, and we'll see you real soon. All right.
Okay.
Pleasure as always, guys.
All right. Take care.
All right, that's Monroe Anderson, Jim Coogan. I'm Ben Jarofsky, and as Monroe and Jim Coogan will tell you, we got to give a big shout out. Oh, I didn't mean to say that. Hey. Shout out to the man, the myth, the legend who made this show possible. And back home in Alton, as Monroe and Jim will tell you, they call him Dr. D. Give yourself a raise, take it out of petty cash. See you tomorrow, everybody.